The subject tonight is this: how close are Saudi Arabia and Israel? Are they this close? Are they that close? Or are they that close and getting closer? I have my own point of view about that, but I want to hear yours by telephone, by email, by SMS, or on the Twitter feed. Once upon a time, this question would have been an absurdity. The very idea that Saudi Arabia, of all countries, would have any kind of relations with Israel would have been absolutely fantastic, out of the question. But when you think about it, it is entirely logical, given the character of both states, the nature of both states, the pattern of international alliances of both states, the conduct of both states, the source of weapons of both states, and the, well, growing closeness on important strategic positions between the two countries. You realize it's not so crazy anymore. Of course, the Saudis in particular have gone to great lengths to try to conceal the growing confluence between themselves and Israel. The problem is, Israel's not a society in which secrets are often kept for long. Even the secret of Israel's possession of illegally held nuclear weapons, 220 of them at least, was itself released into the public domain by an Israeli Jew, Mordechai Vanunu, who did the world a very signal service. So nothing stays secret in Israel, and there are some in Israel who have a vested interest in boasting about this growing closeness between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, there was a story which went around the world this week claiming that the Panama Papers leaks indicated that the Saudi Arabian regime had paid the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu $50 million for his election fund. Now, that has been strenuously denied by Saudi Arabia, and I guess we'll have to wait for further and better particulars from the Panama Papers. Remember, there are 9 million documents in those papers before we establish the truth or otherwise of that claim. But the more significant point is that so many people were ready to believe the story, and the circulation of the story is, in a sense, just as significant to this debate as whether or not the story is true. Now, in the course of the show, I will lay out the various ways in which the attitudes and actions of both states are strikingly similar, making a close alliance between them not illogical at all. But let me take my first caller first. Catherine Shakdam is Director of Programs at Shafakna for Middle East Studies. Catherine, are you there on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome indeed. You will have seen the story in the Huffington Post this week, which sketched out, as I have tried to do there, the kind of similarities of attitude and action between the two states. What did you think of that article, if you saw it? And tell me what you think the relationship between the two countries is.
Well, when it comes to relationship, I think that if you look at the political ideology of Zionism and Wahhabism, they are very similar. It's not exactly the same in that they just express a form of fascism, and they are based on the same desire to impose and exploit religion as a political format, if you will, to promote imperialism. We have lived for many decades under this idea that Israel and Saudi Arabia are sitting on opposite sides of the spectrum and that they are natural enemies. What they are, in fact, is that they're natural allies, because they are looking for the same thing, which is imposing their own imperial will by dissolving national sovereignty in the Middle East and balkanizing the Middle East so that control could be further assessed. But I think that what we tend to forget is that there is a thing called the Greater Israel, which is at the base, at the core root of Zionism, of this ideology. And that if you look today, at Wahhabism, which has inspired the likes of Daesh militants and Al-Qaeda and any form of Islamic radicalism, in Iraq, in Syria, and across the greater Middle Eastern region, you will understand that they, in fact, both the expression of the same fascism, the same imperialism, and that they're working towards the same very goal, and that looking at it as if they were different or, antithetical of each other is actually, it's actually the wrong way to look at things, it's the wrong perspective. They are very similar, and I would encourage people to actually look up the Union Plan, which was set up in the 1980s, which outline what we see today, which is the use of Islamic radicalism and terrorism to balkanize the Middle East, to turn the international community against the Middle East, and for the Middle East to inspire fear, for the Islamic community to inspire fear. And another book, which was written by Prime Minister Moshe Sharett, which was, of course, an Israeli official prime minister, who, again, outlined the same idea, the same modus operandi, how to utilize and exploit Islamic radicalism and terrorism to actually forward Israel's security, to make sure that Israel would not be challenged, not only politically, but militarily as well. And this is something that we tend to forget. We forget to kind of connect the dots and look at the picture the way that they looked at the picture. They have had decades of planning. When we're looking at the picture, we are too close to the picture to actually understand what it is that is happening. And we tend to take at face value what politicians and officials are telling us, when really what all they're doing is pulling a blanket over our eyes and kind of preventing us from actually looking at reality. We are being blinded and I think deafened by what they're telling us. And we forget to see what is happening on the ground. There's a dichotomy in between what politicians are saying and realities on the ground. And today, Islamic radicalism, Wahhabism, is actually a product of Zionism. It's an extension of Wahhabism, of Zionism, excuse me.
Well, they have a number of less complicated similarities, don't they? They both are involved in terrorism overseas. They're both supporting, openly or secretly, the fanatic extremists in Syria to destroy it. They're both on the same side in that conflict. They both want to destroy the regime in Damascus. They both wanted to destroy the regime in Baghdad, as was. They are involved in terrorist acts overseas. They both practice apartheid within their own countries. In the case of Saudi Arabia, anyone who is not a male Sunni of their particular stripe of Sunni Islam is an inferior and second-class citizen who is seen as a threat, a potential threat to the state. They both have sizable minorities living within their territory that they regard as the enemy within. They're both armed by the United States, and in the case of Israel, financed by the United States also. They both emerged from the ashes of World War I, in the case of Israel through the Balfour Declaration, in the case of Saudi Arabia through the special relationship that Britain had with the Al Saud family and its head, Abdulaziz. They both were quickly seen to be, and that's the reason they were founded, tools of imperialism. They both regard Iran as their #1 enemy. They both jointly acted in Congress and in the various lobbies to try to destroy President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. And believe me, I could go on, Catherine, as I've no doubt you could also. But when you put all these things together, it's not so surprising, really, is it?
No, not at all. And I would add something which is quite recent, is this new annexation of the two islands in the Red Sea by Saudi Arabia, when when the King of Saudi Arabia traveled to Egypt and essentially managed to convince President Sisi to hand out and
I
give
think
up
we know how they managed to convince him, Catherine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the point is, you would notice that Israel had no problem whatsoever. When you would think, you would imagine that they would have had a problem should the Saudi be, in fact, a state of Israel. They didn't have any. Tell you that there's in fact an alliance. There's an alliance. And if I may just add another point, I think that the Saudi and the Israeli are working together in concert to hold a monopoly on the world oil route and on natural resources in the Middle East, because whoever would control the Red Sea has an opening, of course, on the Suez Canal. And if you look at the war in Yemen with Bab el-Mandab, then the Saudi would have complete monopoly over the world oil route, and that would mean that Israel would have absolute control over not only the resources in the Middle East, but how ships are being, directed through the world oil route. And that would mean that essentially Western powers and the international community would become a vassal of Greater Israel. And I think that's the plan. And that's what the Saudi are working towards. And I think that we're missing the bigger picture here, because I didn't see anything in the media which kind of tell that story. And I think that we failed to really address the danger here.
Okay, well, we're not going to fail here, Catherine, and you've kicked us off brilliantly. Thank you very much indeed for that call. Catherine Shakdam. Ali